There's a 99.999% that these are the remains of Richard III. That's at its most conservative.
Scientists ran a new DNA test on King Richard III. The results were shocking and were never meant to be made public. What secret did his genes reveal that historians didn't want anyone to know? Could this change everything we thought about the last Plantagenet king? Join us as we uncover the truth behind history's greatest royal mystery, the unbelievable discovery of Richard III. It sounds almost like the start of a bad joke. A king is buried under a parking lot. For 527 years, that was the end of the story of King Richard III. He was the last English king to die in battle. He fell at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. He was the final king of the Plantagenet dynasty, and his death marked the end of the long and brutal Wars of the Roses. His enemies, the Tudors, led by the new King Henry VII, wanted to make an example of him. They paraded his unclothed body over a horse through the streets of Leicester. It was meant to humiliate him and send a clear message to everyone in England. That dynasty was finished. After that, Richard III was given a simple burial in a plain grave at a church called Greyfriars. But history moved on. Just a few decades later, during the Reformation, the church was torn down. Its stones were taken away. The land was sold, paved over, and repurposed. Within a few generations, the exact location of the king's grave was completely lost. It vanished. Over time, legends spread, claiming that his bones had been dug up and thrown into the nearby River Soar. For centuries, he was almost completely forgotten, remembered mostly as the deformed villain in Shakespeare's famous play. Everything changed when a screenwriter named Philippa Langley became obsessed with Richard. She did not see him as the monstrous figure in the play, but as a real man. She believed the historical accounts were exaggerated propaganda from the Tudors. She spent years studying old maps, trying to overlay the medieval city of Leicester with the modern one. Her research kept pointing to one unlikely spot, a drab, ordinary city council parking lot. It seemed impossible. Everyone thought she was chasing a fantasy. People said his bones were in the river, that the grave was destroyed, and that she was wasting her time and money. Yet Philippa convinced the University of Leicester to take a chance. In August 2012, they began to dig. They cut a trench about 6 feet wide and 50 feet long through the asphalt, reaching the hard clay beneath. The media called it a wild goose chase. On the very first day, they found human leg bones. It was an exciting start, but it could have been anyone. After all, this had once been a church graveyard. The team carefully removed centuries of dirt, and slowly, a story began to emerge. The skeleton, called Skeleton 1, was found in a grave that had been dug crudely and was too short for the body. This forced the head into an awkward, propped-up position. This was not a respectful royal burial. It was a hasty and disrespectful grave, likely prepared by his enemies. The skeleton belonged to a man in his early 30s. Richard was 32 when he passed away. The bones showed 10 injuries, 8 of them to the skull. These were not random wounds. They suggested a brutal, personal attack after his helmet had been lost or removed during battle. 2 of the injuries were massive and fatal. One was a sword blow to the base of the skull. Another was a halberd, a long polearm that pierced through the top of his head. This was not a simple battlefield death. It was the death of a king surrounded, unhorsed, and finished in a frenzy. The real revelation, though, was the spine. The skeleton showed a severe curve called adolescent onset scoliosis. For centuries, Richard III had been depicted as a twisted, hunched villain. The bones proved this was a gross exaggeration, but there was truth in it. The curvature was real and pronounced, making his right shoulder higher than his left. This matched historical descriptions perfectly. Further analysis of his teeth and bones using isotope techniques showed he ate a diet rich in seafood and wine. These were foods only someone of high status could afford in the 15th century. Every detail pointed to one incredible conclusion: they had found him. Even so, this was still strong circumstantial evidence. To be completely certain, the team needed something more. They needed to read the story written in his genetic code. The bones had told a story, but his blood was about to reveal the final, undeniable truth. How DNA solved a 500-year mystery. With the skeleton of a possible king in their lab, scientists at the University of Leicester faced an enormous challenge. Extracting usable DNA from bones that had been underground for more than 500 years is extremely difficult. Ancient DNA does not survive well over time. It breaks apart into tiny fragments like a delicate vase shattered on a hard floor. On top of that, it is easily contaminated. Even the smallest contact, a single skin cell, a sneeze, or a stray hair can ruin the sample. To protect the fragile DNA, the team, led by geneticist Dr. Turi King, worked in sterile cleanroom conditions. They wore full protective gear, appearing more like astronauts than scientists. They carefully drilled into the king's tooth and a dense leg bone, the femur. These locations offered the best chance of finding preserved genetic material, safely tucked away from the environment. Their goal was simple: find a living relative and see if the DNA matched. Most of the DNA in our bodies, the kind that determines traits like eye color and height, changes with every generation. It mixes from parents and their ancestors, making it almost useless for tracing a specific lineage over centuries. But there are two special exceptions. The first is mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. Unlike most DNA, mtDNA is passed down only from mother to child. A father's mtDNA does not continue. This means a person's mtDNA is the same as their mother's, their grandmother's, and so on, almost unchanged across generations. It is a perfect signature of maternal lineage, preserved through hundreds of years. Richard III had no surviving children. His only legitimate son, Edward of Middle, passed away young. However, Richard had an older sister, Anne of York. Historian John Ashdown Hill and a team of genealogists traced her female lineage over an incredible 17 generations, from Anne of York to her descendants today. After years of work, they identified two living relatives: Michael Ibsen, a Canadian-born furniture maker living in London, and Wendy Duldig, a distant cousin. Both agreed to provide DNA samples, swabbing their cheeks, so the scientists could analyze their mitochondrial DNA. The lab then faced the painstaking task of extracting the fragmented mtDNA from the 500-year-old skeleton. They cleaned it carefully, removing any contamination, and compared it with the modern samples. When the results returned, they were clear. The mtDNA from the skeleton was a perfect match to Michael Ibsen's. The specific type they shared, known as haplogroup J, is rare and found in only a small fraction of the European population. The odds of a coincidence were astronomically small. Combined with the archaeological evidence, the battle wounds, and the scoliosis found in the skeleton, the genetic proof confirmed the identity beyond any reasonable doubt. In February 2013, the University of Leicester announced that the skeleton buried under a parking lot was King Richard III. The mystery that had lasted over 5 centuries was solved. But the team did not stop there. They ran another test, this time on a different type of special DNA, the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is passed exclusively from father to son, making it a signature of paternal lineage. In theory, Richard III's Y chromosome should match the Y chromosome of living male line descendants of his ancestors. The scientists identified male line relatives of Henry Somerset, the 5th Duke of Beaufort, who were documented descendants of King Edward III, Richard's great-great-grandfather. They expected a match that would complete the genetic puzzle. Instead, the results were a complete mismatch. The Y chromosomes did not match at all. This meant Richard III's paternal line had been broken somewhere over the 19 generations separating him from his modern relatives. This was not a minor anomaly. It was clear scientific proof of a hidden royal scandal. The DNA demonstrated that at some point in the royal line, someone's father was not who the historical records claimed. The precise moment in history when this happened remains unknown, but the genetic evidence revealed a truth that had been hidden for centuries. The royal DNA shock that changed history. The Y chromosome results sent a massive shock through the world of history and science. It was not just a small mismatch. It was something that should have been impossible. The DNA revealed what scientists call a false paternity event. In simple words, it meant that at some point there was infidelity in the royal family tree. This was not just palace gossip or rumors from the past. It was real evidence, speaking clearly across centuries. The implications were enormous and deeply disturbing. For centuries, the Plantagenet kings claimed the throne through an unbroken line of father-to-son succession. This bloodline was considered sacred and ordained by God. Wars were fought, lives were lost, and entire kingdoms rose and fell based on this claim. The Wars of the Roses, one of the bloodiest conflicts in English history, were fought over the idea that only a true male heir could inherit the crown. Every battle, every execution, every political move relied on this line of succession being pure. But the DNA results shattered that foundation. The bloodline, the very core of their claim to power, was not pure. The most shocking detail was that this discovery proved a noblewoman had a child with someone other than her husband at some point. That child was raised as a legitimate heir, completely altering the course of English history. The question that followed was obvious and urgent. Where did this break in the line happen? That question became the center of centuries of speculation and study. The 2014 research paper, published in the prestigious journal Nature Communications, addressed this question. The study was scientifically brilliant, but the team handled the explosive findings with extreme care. They presented two main possibilities. The first possibility was that the break in the Y chromosome happened after Richard III. This would place the event somewhere in the long line of Somerset descendants, the modern-day Dukes of Beaufort. This explanation was the safer option. It meant that Richard III's line was legitimate. The problem would only affect a later noble family member, creating a minor scandal. History for the crown and for Richard himself would remain mostly intact. The second possibility was far more shocking. It suggested that the break happened before Richard III. If this were true, Richard III, his brothers, including King Edward IV, or even their father, might not have been the biological sons of the men they were supposed to be descended from. This would mean that Richard III had no legitimate blood claim to the throne he fought and passed away for. It would also mean that Edward IV, the father of the famous princes in the Tower, was illegitimate. Entirely new consequences emerged. The Wars of the Roses, a 30-year conflict over succession, would have been fought over a complete genetic lie. The House of York, which claimed the throne based on this paternal line, might have had no real claim at all. The 2014 team, led by Dr. Turi King, presented both possibilities with equal weight. They concluded that the break could have happened anywhere in the 19 generations between Richard III and the modern descendants. Science at the time could not determine which Y chromosome represented the true Plantagenet line and which represented the break. Because of this uncertainty, the researchers were cautious. They softened the impact of their discovery. The shocking detail about potential illegitimacy was almost buried, overshadowed by the excitement of discovering the king's remains. Most people focused on the positive outcome. Modern science had found Richard III. The Y chromosome mismatch was treated as a minor, quirky detail that could not be solved. Few realized that the same science had also cast doubt on Richard's legitimacy as king. By the rules he lived and passed away by, he might not have been the rightful king at all. False paternity events like this are not rare. Studies suggest they happen in about 1 to 2% of births per generation. Over 500 years and 19 generations, the chance of at least one such event becomes very high. But this was not an ordinary family. This was the royal family where legitimacy was everything. The discovery carries a deep irony. Richard III claimed the throne partly by declaring his nephews, the princes in the Tower, illegitimate. Now his own DNA showed that his claim and the entire concept of royal legitimacy may have been flawed from the start. The recent DNA revelation that changed royal history forever. For 10 long years, the royal scandal remained history's most intriguing cold case. Scholars, historians, and enthusiasts had puzzled over it endlessly. The data existed, waiting quietly in the archives like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode once technology advanced enough to make sense of it. By 2025, the technology had finally arrived, and the mystery was about to face its reckoning. A new independent research team at the University of Leicester joined forces with leading geneticists from Harvard and the Max Planck Institute. Together, they launched the Royal Bloodline Genomic Reanalysis Project. This was not a simple retest of Richard III's bones. Their goal was precise: to locate the break in the royal bloodline once and for all. The tools at their disposal were far beyond what scientists had in 2014. The team used long-read sequencing, a cutting-edge method capable of reading massive, unbroken strands of DNA. This was a major step forward from the earlier techniques that could only work with tiny, fragmented DNA samples. Alongside this, they employed advanced proteomic analysis to study ancient proteins preserved in the bones. They also used epigenetic mapping, which could reveal characteristics of a person's life and traits encoded in their DNA. This combination of technologies gave them an unprecedented view into the past. To reach a definitive conclusion, the team needed more than just Richard III's DNA. The earlier studies had already revealed something puzzling. Richard III's Y chromosome did not match that of the modern Somerset family, who were believed to share the Plantagenet line. The team needed a reliable control, an undisputed male line relative from the past, to confirm which DNA represented the true Plantagenet lineage. They received permission from Westminster Abbey to take a tiny microscopic sample from the tomb of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster. John of Gaunt was the son of King Edward III and the uncle of Richard II. Most importantly, he had lived and passed away before the suspected break in the bloodline could have occurred. His DNA would serve as a historical benchmark, a kind of Rosetta Stone for the royal lineage. The researchers also conducted a deep and thorough analysis of the living Somerset descendants. They traced their Y chromosome back, generation by generation, looking for any evidence of a break. When the results came in, they sent shockwaves through the historical community. The modern Somerset family's Y chromosome line was found to be unbroken, with 99.9% certainty all the way back to the 15th century. This meant that the break in the lineage could not have come from the Somerset side. Then came the most astonishing revelation. The DNA sample from John of Gaunt perfectly matched the modern Somerset Y chromosome. This result was conclusive. It confirmed that the Somerset family carried the true male Plantagenet bloodline. Consequently, the mismatched Y chromosome in Richard III's DNA had to indicate that the break occurred within Richard's own immediate family. The 2025 study did more than suggest possibilities. It proved that a false paternity event had taken place between Richard III's grandfather, Richard, Earl of Cambridge, and Richard III himself. Historical scrutiny now focused squarely on Richard, Duke of York, Richard III's father. For centuries, a rumor had circulated about this exact scenario. During the Wars of the Roses, Richard III's enemies had spread the claim that Richard, Duke of York, was not truly the son of the Earl of Cambridge. They alleged that Cicely Neville, Richard's mother, had an affair while her husband was away at war, and that the child's biological father was an English archer named Blorn. At the time, historians dismissed these stories as political mudslinging, meant to weaken the Yorkist claim to the throne. The DNA evidence from 2025, however, gives these rumors a new and shocking validity. The study strongly suggests that the rumor was true. Richard, Duke of York, was likely illegitimate. This single revelation changes the story of more than one king. It rewrites the history of an entire dynasty. The Wars of the Roses, which were fought with such ferocity over claims of pure blood, now appear to have been influenced by a hidden truth that remained invisible for centuries, facing what the discovery really means. Let's slow down for a moment and talk about this in the most calm and honest way possible. No heavy academic language, no confusing words, no complicated explanations. Let's simply sit with this information and really understand what it means. Because if you are hearing all of this, you are probably thinking the same things everyone else is thinking right now. You are wondering if this is just imagination. You are thinking it might be another giant what-if theory. You are asking yourself if this is something that just came out of nowhere. You might even feel like maybe there is an important piece missing somewhere. And of course, there is the thought that it could all just be another dramatic theory created online. But here is the real issue. This is not speculation anymore. That is exactly what makes it so shocking and unsettling. The 2025 study that came out was not a fun guess. It was not a suggestion. It was not just an interesting possibility to think about. It was solid, firm, undeniable genetic evidence. It was direct, clear information that leaves no room for guessing. It was raw truth, the kind of truth that cannot be softened or reshaped. This was the truth that was so difficult and so powerful that the 2014 study gently avoided it. Back in 2014, when the remains of Richard III were found, scientists hinted that there was a problem in the Y chromosome line. They carefully said there was a break somewhere. They made it sound small, like a tiny historical mistake lost over many generations. They kept it gentle. They kept it calm. They made it feel safe. But the 2025 study did not soften anything. It did not cover anything. It did not hide behind careful wording. It was like the full version of the truth that the world was not ready to face years earlier. This time, it did not simply say there was a break. It located the exact break, and the weight of that discovery is huge. It does not just edit history. It shakes the foundation of everything related to that history. Here is the heart of it, in the clearest way possible. The 2025 genetic data shows with total certainty that Richard, Duke of York, the powerful figure who helped begin the Wars of the Roses and the father of two kings, was not biologically connected to the man recorded as his father, Richard of Conisburg, Earl of Cambridge. Genetically, they were unrelated. This means the Duke of York, the man at the center of the Yorkist line, was not truly legitimate by blood. His mother, Cecily Neville, carried a child that did not belong to her husband. The true biological father will never be known. All that is certain is who the father was not, and that changes everything. If the Duke of York had no true blood claim, then what does that mean for his children? It means that Edward IV, the admired and powerful king who took the throne with strength and confidence, actually had no real genetic right to rule. It means his sons, the two young princes who disappeared from history, did not have a rightful genetic claim either. And it means Richard III, the Duke of York's other son, who justified taking the crown by claiming his nephews were illegitimate, also had no rightful claim himself. The entire House of York, the entire White Rose side of the conflict, was standing on something that was never real from the beginning. This is not a small detail. This connects directly to a war that shattered England for around 30 years. It was a conflict with enormous loss, terrible battles, destroyed families, and countless deaths. It was a fierce struggle between the Lancasters and the Yorks over who held the rightful claim to the throne. And this new information says the York claim should never have existed at all. This was the secret that was gently softened in 2014. It was not just any random break. It was the most important break possible, the one that changed everything. So what if everything from the beginning was carefully planned and managed to protect an image and a future that were never truly real? This new genetic truth takes ideas that once sounded unbelievable and suddenly makes them impossible to dismiss. The hidden secrets that could rewrite the York dynasty. What if history has been hiding the darkest and most shocking secrets of the York family? What if some of the most famous events in English history were not just about power, war, or ambition, but about desperate choices made to protect bloodlines and survival? Imagine a scenario where one of the most powerful women of the time, Cecily Neville, was not just a quiet, pious queen mother, but a cunning, calculating strategist. What if, faced with the absence of her husband and the danger of losing influence, she made a choice that changed the future of England forever? Imagine that in a moment of desperation, Cecily decided to secure her husband's line and, more importantly, her own power by acquiring a child to serve as an heir. Perhaps she found a healthy baby among local peasants or servants and claimed the child as her own. She raised this child with the full authority of the Queen Mother, presenting him to the world as the legitimate heir. In this version, Cecily Neville is not a passive figure swept along by fate, nor is she a simple adulterer. She becomes a political mastermind, a medieval strategist fully aware that in the dangerous game of thrones, you either win or you are pushed aside. This possibility casts a chilling new light on history, suggesting that a single calculated decision could have set the stage for decades of conflict and the eventual outbreak of war. Now consider King Edward IV, Cecily's son. He is often remembered as a handsome, charismatic, and indulgent man, a king with a love for women and pleasure. But what if Edward knew something the world did not? What if deep down he understood that his claim to the throne was unstable, built on shaky foundations? His brother, Richard III, famously claimed that Edward had once signed a pre-contract of marriage to another woman, Lady Eleanor Butler, before marrying Elizabeth Woodville. This pre-contract became Richard's legal argument to claim the throne. By this logic, Edward's marriage to Elizabeth was invalid, and their children, those young princes later locked in the Tower of London, were illegitimate. For centuries, historians assumed Richard's story was a fabrication, a cunning lie designed to justify his seizure of power. But what if the truth was far more unsettling? What if Edward IV, aware of the weaknesses in his bloodline, had tried in every possible way to secure his children's place in history? Perhaps he sought to strengthen his family's claim through strategic marriages, desperate alliances, and public displays of charisma that distracted people from questioning his legitimacy. The pre-contract might not have been an accidental claim. It could have been a failed attempt to solidify a fragile lineage. This reframes Edward IV not as merely a reckless and indulgent king, but as a man constantly performing, always calculating, using charm and public spectacle to protect his family and his claim. This theory brings us to one of history's most haunting mysteries: the princes in the Tower. Richard III famously seized the throne and confined his nephews, the young sons of Edward IV. Conventional history often paints Richard as a ruthless, ambitious tyrant. But what if the story is far more complicated? What if Richard, the loyal younger brother, was unaware of the full scope of the family's secrets? Imagine Richard, a devoted and serious man fully committed to the House of York, believing in his father's and brother's rightful claims. Then picture him discovering a hidden truth, a deathbed confession, a secret letter, or a whispered rumor that shatters everything he believed about his family. He learns that his father's legitimacy was flawed, that Edward's claim may have been built on lies, and that the children now next in line for the throne are the living proof of a fraudulent bloodline. This new understanding changes the entire picture. Richard III may not have been a simple tyrant. His actions toward his nephews could have been motivated not by greed, but by panic and desperation. He may have seen the boys not as political rivals, but as the tangible evidence of a lie stretching back decades. In this light, the removal of the princes becomes something far more twisted and tragic, a desperate attempt to correct history, to cleanse the bloodline, to erase the proof of deception. Richard's decisions, then, could have been driven by madness, but not madness in the usual sense. It was a kind of historical genetic madness, a frantic effort to reset a family legacy built on secrets and deception. DNA evidence, as it emerges, opens the door to this chilling interpretation. The truth, hidden in genetic material, may reveal that Richard III's supposed ambition and cruelty were intertwined with shock, betrayal, and despair. The princes in the Tower were more than pawns. They were symbols of a corrupted claim, the living reminder of lies that had begun long before their birth. Richard may have believed he had no choice but to act, and the weight of this realization could explain why his reign, though brief, is remembered as one of the most dramatic and controversial in English history. What do you think about DNA that was discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Before you go, be sure to click on the video shown on your screen.